What is it you want, Barry? What do you want? You want the moon? Just say the word and I'll throw a lasso around it and pull it down.
You want answers!
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth!
I see dead people.
All I know is that first, you've got to get mad. You've got to say, I'm a human being. God damn it! My life has value!
Filmmaking Conversations with Damian Swady is part of the critical conversations currently taking place across the film community. The podcast reaches out to the next generation of filmmakers who continue to look for inspiration and guidance. Remember to hit the subscribe button and leave a comment in the comments section. Share the podcast with friends and family, and have a great day. And now, over to the host of the show, Damian Swady.
Hi, Rosella. How are you today?
Good. How are you, Damian?
I'm absolutely fantastic. I was lucky enough to watch a brilliant documentary today that I think you may have heard of. It's about a black ice hockey player. Do you know the one I might be talking about?
Yes, that would be the film Willie, which is the story of Willie O'Ree, who is a Canadian hockey player from Fredericton, New Brunswick. Fredericton is a small city. It is considered a city, but it really feels like a little town. And it's his journey to be recognized by the National Hockey League's Hall of Fame. So that's sort of the present day narrative arc, but it also recounts his whole history with hockey and, his professional career, which is really fascinating.
It was indeed. And I can't wait to get into detail with you to discuss that documentary. But before we do that, please do tell us, how did you get your start in the industry and what made you want to become an editor?
Well, okay. After high school, I was always smitten with film. Like, I was always a huge fan of going to the movies. It was always like a magical experience. I still very vividly remember my very first time going to a movie and just how enthralled I was with the experience. And so there was always like an allure for me. And I think there were a couple of films that just totally lit a fire inside me. And I was like, wow, it made me aware of the technique of filmmaking. And the one of them that comes to mind is Blue Velvet, David Lynch's Blue Velvet. And I was probably, too young to see that film at the time, but it was just it was the first movie I saw that made me really think about filmmaking and not just like, oh, I'm sitting in the movies having popcorn and, being entertained. So after high school, and I was educated in Quebec, Canada, which is one of the provinces, and the educational system there is a little bit different. So we finish high school in 11th grade at the age of 17, and then we have 2 years of a sort of pre-university college. And at that time, I was in fine arts, and I was painting and drawing and doing stuff like that, but I took this film class, and just like, I was like, oh, I love film, so I'm going to take this class. And I shot like a little Super 8 film. And then I brought home the little editing kit to edit it at home. And it was like a tiny moviola, like an old fashioned sort of, with a splicer and tape. And I got completely lost in the editing process. And it literally like 14 hours went by and I didn't feel it. And I was just like struck by that. Yeah. And so I decided eventually to go to to study communication studies at university, but with a specialization in film. And the reason I had chosen communications and media is because I wanted the theoretical side of my university education to not just be about like film histories and the film masters. And, I wanted to learn, communications offered courses like, gender studies in the media, or race and ethnicity in the media, or pop culture. And those are the things that theoretically I was more interested in, and wanted to just be aware, because we had courses too, like semiotics, in communications, and just wanted to be like very hyper aware of the messages and the symbols I was putting in my work. So I did that. And I knew on the first day that I wanted to be an editor, just simply based off that little Super 8 film I made, which is crazy. But, you know, on the first day of school, people were like, I want to direct. And I was like, I want to edit.
Always.
That's amazing on the first day, because so many people I've spoke to said it takes time. And some people at film school, for example, say at the end of the first year, 90% of the class doesn't want to be a director. They choose individual paths such as editor, cinematographer, screenwriting. How did you know on the first day? I mean, what really kicked in to make you that convinced you didn't want to be the director?
I think it was just like, you know, consuming a lot of films and looking at the credits, and, you know, Thelma Schoonmaker, Martin Scorsese's editor, just, you know, I think every year my girlfriends and I would get together and watch the Oscars like it was our Super Bowl. And I watched her win an Oscar, and I was just like always enthralled by her work. And so I don't know, I guess also I think that technically I come from a long line of seamstresses. And so I had originally chosen textile art and as my vocation, and even worked as a textile artist for about 18 months when I was like, nope, got to quit everything and go back to school. Like, this is not for me. But I think that there's a certain overlap between that sort of discipline, you know, doing detailed, repetitive work, and editing. And my brain is wired to do that sort of thing, and also to tell stories. Like, I just love the storytelling aspect. So so editing just seemed like a really good fit, and I just really loved it. You know, it was really just mostly about the love of the craft.
And was it editing that took you to New York? Because you're originally from Montreal, am I right?
Yes, I am originally from Montreal. And so back in 2002, I met my now wife, Christine Champagne, and she is originally from Massachusetts, but lived, as soon as she finished college, moved to New York. So she's been in New York for a long time. And she, you know, we had to have a long distance relationship for, wait for it, 14 years.
What? You've got to explain that in detail. I don't even know. How does that make sense? Well, you would tell me. So
The most extraordinary aspect of my life, I think. But yeah, no, because she could have come to I could have sponsored her for immigration, and she could have come to Canada at any point in our relationship. But she doesn't speak a word of French. Sorry, that's my dog Omar.
hi, Omar.
He's named after Omar Little from The Wire.
Okay.
But anyways, so yeah, so she did not speak a word of French, and Montreal, you know, she's a writer, and it wouldn't have been a really good idea for her career-wise to make that move. But for me, coming to New York would have been a great career move. So it was a no-brainer from the beginning that I would be the one to move, and that we could live together like a regular couple. But New York is in the United States, and the Defense of Marriage Act, aka DOMA, was a law at the federal level that prevented the federal government from recognizing same-sex couples as married couples, no matter where they got married, no matter their, you know,
Oh, I see.
yeah. So that was a big impediment. So we had to patiently wait and hope. And I knew that DOMA would be repealed eventually. Christine wasn't quite as optimistic as I was, but I knew it would be repealed. And then it was in 2013, thankfully. And so we immediately set forth on, you know, getting married, getting a marriage license, and going through the immigration process, which ended up taking a lot longer than it should have. Because I finally got my green card in 2016, which, as you know, was the year Donald Trump was elected, and then immigration services slowed down to a snail's pace. So it took a long time. I'm finally sworn in as a citizen, but that took a long time. It took a lot longer than it should have. But and even the process getting from 2013. In 2013, I was actually in London editing a series. So we couldn't we had to even postpone the marriage timing wise. The repeal of DOMA wasn't the most convenient time for us. So we didn't get married until 2014. So there was just a bunch of roadblocks, but we got through it, and now we live together, and we've been living in the same apartment for 4 years. And now, thanks to the pandemic, we spend every day 24/7 in our apartment for the past 4 months.
Your wife is American.
Yeah, so that's what took me. Oh gosh, I forgot to answer your question. That's why I'm here. So because of love, not because of my career, but it was an amazing career move because yeah, I was super nervous about moving here, having only had editing experience in Canada aside from the UK co-productions I worked on. But I was like nervous. Are they going to look at my resume and be like, what the hell is this? I don't know what, I don't know any of these production companies, and just like brush me off. But they didn't. And, New York's an amazing place that way. Like, if you're a creative person and you come to New York City, it really is an incredibly welcoming place, and I was really grateful that it took a little time. It took maybe about 4 months before I got my first job, but and I worked really hard at it, sending out resumes every day and whatnot. So it did take a while, but not that long in the grand scheme of things. And then once I got one gig, it sort of just got the ball rolling, and one thing led to another. And so I've been very happy with the work I get to do here. It's different from what I was doing in Canada, and I'm loving everything I do. So it's great.
And what were some of the first gigs you got once you moved to New York City?
So my first job was at Part 2 Pictures, a lovely production company in Brooklyn, and the show, it was on Showtime. The show is called Darknet, and it's sort of the documentary version of Black Mirror. And the episode that I worked on was the second season, episode 6, called My Community, and basically about people who were the victims of online harassment to the point where they literally were ousted from their communities. And it was shocking. Like, there was, one of the stories, there were 2 stories. The story of Larry Posner, who was the father of one of the children that were gunned down at the Sandy Hook massacre, and how he tried to debunk the conspiracy theorists who were saying that it never happened, that it was a false flag operation. And he, was so hurt by that he single-handedly tried to debunk it online, which made him the victim of incessant harassment to the point where his family had to move away from Connecticut, and his location is undisclosed. And the other story was about a teacher who was a Black woman living in a very conservative town in Arizona, and whose students were harassing her like continuously. It was just horrific. And, she was being photographed and mocked on Twitter, and it was incessant. And she ended up being fired, losing everything. The school sued her. She lost her home. She lost her job. Like, it was just catastrophic, the effects that it had on her. And, that woman actually reached out to me on Twitter because I had tweeted a link to the show when it aired. And she was overcome with, the storytelling. And she was very, very happy about the way that we told her story, that she finally had a voice and was able to recount her entire side of the story, and for people to see. So that was a huge like moment for me, that someone, thanks to social media, was able to contact me directly, because editors are really behind the scenes, way behind the scenes. Like,
Yes. Unsung heroes in so many ways. They can save and make and break a production.
so for a layperson who has nothing to do with the film industry to recognize the fact that I had a hand in her telling her story was like tremendous.
And being a part of these brilliant stories that you have done, what led you being the editor for The Last Offense? And what was it like working for Viola Davis?
Wow. So what led me to that? Gosh, I can't remember. I think it was a friend of a friend. It was through the grapevine. Someone said, oh yeah, that's it. Someone I worked with at Part 2 Pictures, in fact, who was doing, she directed an episode about the alt-right, and she sent me an email out of the blue one day and said, hey, I'm a story producer on this new show that ABC is doing, and they want to do true like documentary. It's not like sort of a Dateline or 2020. It's like a real criminal justice documentary series. And she said, would you, what's your availability and would you be interested? And I was like, well, hell yeah, I'd be interested. So I sent them my resume and went to the interview and was really excited to get that job. I think it was one of the most exciting job, like when you get the news. I think I was one, because I was like, oh my gosh, like Viola Davis is the executive producer, and like little old me from Canada is going to be working on this show. Like, so I was really excited and starstruck. And, but that job, I have to say, was emotionally so intense. Like, Julius's story, I worked on the Julius Jones story, and Julius's story was so heartbreaking. And I literally cried at least once or twice a week.
Oh gosh. Why did that happen?
Well, okay, so Julius is on death row in an Oklahoma prison for a crime he did not commit. I'm super confident about that, having seen everything. He never got a fair defense at all. So even based on just the defense that he got at trial, he should get a new trial. I mean, it's abominable. So the footage, the footage contained scenes with his family, interviews with his father and mother, and the toll that it has taken on their lives to have their son be on death row for 20 years is just heart-wrenching. It literally rips your heart out of your chest. Like, many times they would, tear up and get emotional. And I mean, to see that and not react, I think, it's a human reaction. And also Julius, technically by law is allowed to be filmed for a documentary, but the Oklahoma penitentiary where he is just repeatedly denied our requests to go in and interview him. So he, everything was done by phone. So all of the, Julius's voice is just his voice. So we had just audio. But I had, hours and hours and hours and hours of phone calls between him and Gemma Jordan, the story producer, who did an incredible job and who, really forged a relationship with Julius. Like they talked on the phone like a couple of times a week for a year. So, and sometimes he would call her, and, she'd be sitting in the edit suite. So I would get to speak to Julius a little bit. And every time we got off the phone, I would feel so emotional just because he was just so filled with gratitude, and and just hearing him speak, like, made it so, like, speaking directly to him, which is another thing that editors don't always get to do. It just made the story so human and so, like, personal, and it was very emotional. And I think that some of the scenes, like, that make me cry when I watch the show, even though I some of them were cut by me, some of them by Kareem, and an incredibly talented editor, Kareem Lopez, who edited the first episode of the Julius Jones story. I think that those episodes were edited by someone who was also crying as they edited them. So I think that the emotion you pour into something, comes back out when viewers watch it. And I think I think it's important to really feel the feelings when you're editing.
That's amazing. It's a great point you made there. And I'm guessing in the documentary that I watched this morning that we spoke about briefly before, your heart was in it exactly the same way. That was a very, very moving story. What a guy. I mean, the type of soul and spirit and fundamental belief he had in himself and still does have in himself is amazing. I mean, tell us about that. How did you get involved? And what was the process like that for you as an editor to edit something like that?
Well, again, it was word of mouth, friend of a friend of mine in Montreal, Nabil Meshi, who's one of the greatest friends in my life and a wonderful editor, like unbelievably talented guy. He wrote me a Facebook message and was like, "Hey, my friend is looking for an editor for her documentary. Can I put you in touch?" And I said, "Sure." And this had happened a couple of times before, where someone's like, "Oh, a friend of mine's looking for an editor." And, and I would look at the trailer and I'd be like, "No, this is really not for me." So I wasn't like, I didn't have super high hopes. I was just like, whatever, I'll look at it. But she, the filmmaker, Laurence Mathieu-Léger, who is also from Montreal, who happened to live around the corner from me, but I never knew her in Montreal, which is weird. She edited herself. She edited a demo when she had shot, when she had enough footage to do so, and sent me that. And the second I saw it, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to work on this. I want to tell this man's story so bad. And even if she can't pay me, I'm going to make this work. Like, somehow I will do it. But she did pay me.
Even better.
Yeah. She was like, no. It's funny because it was the first time ever in my life I went to a job interview. And then when we talked about salary, I was like, well, you could pay me like, this much. And she was like, don't undersell yourself. Like, I'm going to pay you. And she gave me more than what I asked for.
Oh, excellent.
Because she was like, yeah, because she was very much like, as women, we need to assert, we need to be more assertive when we're negotiating money, because we have the tendency to be like, look, if you can't afford it, like, I'll take this, but,
Okay.
yeah. So that worked out. And so when we met, I think it was just instant, we clicked instantly, and we're working together on a new film soon. But, it was a wonderful working relationship. And I count her as also one of my closest friends in New York. Laurence she's incredibly generous, and she's just a wonderful filmmaker to work with. And she is so passionate and energetic about her work. Like, she will like jump to her feet and run and film something at the spur of the moment. Brilliant. And yeah, she's just really unbelievable. And she's like a one-woman team. Like, she goes out all of Willie was filmed mostly by her.
Wow. I was going to ask about that. That's amazing.
I know, right?
Because I wondered how much footage you'd have got back from different cameras. But it sounds like you got footage back from one camera most of the time.
Most of the time. She used two cameras, but by herself. She would go and set up her A cam on a tripod, and then she would, start the interview and use the B cam herself to get close-ups of hands and faces during interviews. So everything was pretty much shot with two cameras, but most of the time it was her by herself. She also had another DP sometimes, and another kick-ass female cinematographer named Ninon Pedneau. She's really wonderful. And so sometimes there were two cameras, but I would say like more than half the footage is Laurence by herself.
So she sounds like she embodies the self-shooting spirit.
Oh yeah, she does. It's amazing. You know, she's super talented, and she's actually really she's really proficient on Adobe Premiere as well. So
Right.
I edited the film in record time, because she was able to like put things together and like send them to me and like, so that film was edited pretty quickly. However, the first few months I was really by myself because she was still shooting. So I was out totally by myself in the edit suite. And, we had like a big story jam session where, we wrote down every scene that we liked on cue cards and put them on a huge bulletin board in the order that we thought they could, they would work best in. And, we each brought like different things to the table as well. Like, because I had worked on The Last Defense, and because I had worked on the Darknet episode and worked on other things that focused on, the history, like in Oklahoma, as we now everyone knows about the Tulsa massacre because of recent events. But, at the time, like that was news to me. When I was working on the Last Defense, I had never known about the Tulsa massacre. And I learned about that because, the history of race in Oklahoma is extremely fraught with, cruel injustices. And so, when she told me this story about, we weren't sure whether we were going to put this in the film or not, she said, Willie tried out for baseball when he was, because he loved baseball and hockey, and he wasn't sure which one. He was really great at both of them. And she told me the story. She's like, we talked about it in the interview. Willie tried out for baseball, and he went down to a tryout in Georgia in the South, and it was like 1956, and his parents were really scared for him to go. And right away, it clicked in my mind. I was like, that is 1 year after Emmett Till was lynched in the South.
Oh,
and he
of
was a boy
course.
from the North. Yeah. And I said, you know
Yeah.
what? Of course his parents were terrified, because that's the kind of thing that spread through the Black community all over North America. And I was like, we need to include the story because, it was Willie's first exposure to Jim Crow laws, being having grown up in Fredericton, New Brunswick, he had never experienced segregation. So, he took he went all the way down to the South. He flew there, but then took a bus home. And, when he got there, it was like right away he saw the segregated bathrooms, and he couldn't even stay in the same hotel as the other white players. The Black players were in a separate hotel. He was called the N-word on the field. Like it was bad. And then when he didn't make the team, and he thought to himself, he felt relief, actually. He was like,
Yes.
you know what? I don't know that I want to be exposed to this. So, he got on a bus to go home, and he says that along this like 3-day bus ride, the further north he got, the further closer to the front of the bus he got. So he just kept moving up, because he had to start off in the back in the South. And so the further north he got, every time they'd get out, he would try to get a seat closer to the front so that when he got to Fredericton, he was in the front seat. And he got off the bus and he said, I think I'll stick to hockey, which is a huge thing to say because, as we know, hockey is not exactly the most diverse sport either. So, for him to have made that decision based on his experience, it must have been pretty bad. But Willie being Willie, he's not the kind of person to go into gory details. And he very much comes from this generation where it's like, you know, his motto is like, keep your head down, keep your head in the game,
Work hard, and, you know, success is the best revenge. You know, like be good at what you do, and that's the best way to show, you know, that's the best answer, clap back you could have, you know. One of the things I found interesting as well regarding some of the things he said is how in Canada he didn't have to sit at the back of the bus. The race issues were very different compared to America.
Well, yes and no.
Okay. But if he had stayed in Canada, couldn't he have played professionally there? Because I'm not an expert on Canadian hockey or even American hockey. I just know I've seen it in Madison Square Garden and I loved it. But I don't know the ins and outs. I mean, was that a possibility for him?
You mean to be a player on a Canadian team?
Yes, in Canada.
Well, okay, so the NHL, the National Hockey League, like if you look at most American teams, I guarantee you at least 40% of almost every team is Canadian players. So I always tease my friend who's a New York Rangers fan, you know, when they win a game, and they're like, woohoo, you know, New York. And I'm like, and Canada, because like half your players are Canadian.
Good on you.
But yeah, there's a lot of like, you know, there's a lot of moving around. And so when Willie started to play, he was part of the Montreal Canadiens farm team, which is like a team that farms out the players. And so they're not in the team yet, but they're in the farm team. So they'll they might replace a player who's out injured or, you know. So he was in the farm team for the Montreal Canadiens. And then at the time, there were only 6 teams in the NHL. This was in 1958. So, you know, there was not that many choices anyway. But the Boston Bruins called him up to play a couple of games and to try him out. And, you know, and they liked him and he got in. So, and he was literally the first Black player in the NHL. And that's how it happened, just like that. And and that was 10 years after Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier in baseball. Yeah. You know, but unlike baseball, hockey didn't have like a steady stream of Black players entering the game after Willie. You know, it was 16 years before the next Black player.
Jesus. 16 years. Wow.
And there's still an infinitesimally small percentage of players. You know, and there are a lot of reasons for that.
What are some of the reasons, do you think?
I think that access is one. You know, obviously you need ice. And the equipment's expensive. Not to say that yes. Economically, you know.
Yeah.
But I do think that it's just one of those sports that like it's so synonymous with like northern cold countries, you know, like Russia is big on hockey and you know, so Nordic, like yeah, exactly. It's such a Nordic thing. And I think that you know, it's not like you can just like if you live in Florida, you can't just like put on a pair of skates and go to the park and start playing hockey. Way. But in Canada, you do that. Like I spent my life skating in Canada, you know, so in the winter I would grab my skates, go to the park, put them on and get on the ice. Like that's what we did. So, you know, Canada has a smaller Black population than the United States does. So there's just the sheer numbers aren't as, you know, they aren't as high. And, you know, and I do think it all stems on inclusivity as well. And, you know, the ugly truth is you have to acknowledge that, you know, Black players aren't treated so great by fans. Fans are overwhelmingly white, and to
Yeah.
this day, I mean, as you saw in the film, what Willie experienced on the ice was the exact same thing Wayne Simmons experienced a couple of years ago,
Yeah.
or Devonte Smith-Pelly. Like, it's just, it still happens, and it's outrageous, and hopefully there's some sort of a sea change happening in people's attitudes. But it's just crazy that any player trying to play a sport that they love would be subjected to race-based taunts from fans. Like, that's unacceptable. And they have gotten stricter about kicking people out of the stands who do that. When it happened to Willie,
Oh, it just happened. Yeah.
yeah, it just happened. And then Willie was ejected from the game in Chicago. He tells that story about how he got his teeth knocked out by a Chicago Blackhawk. And
Yeah.
then, he was ejected from the game because it was too dangerous for him to stay. So, that was in the late 50s. And then, hopefully today, when that happens, it's the people, making the racial slurs that are ejected from the rink.
And you mentioned earlier about you edited this very quickly. How quickly did you edit it, and how fast was that compared to The Last Defense, for example?
Well, first of all, we have to take into account the format. The Last Defense was, 46 minutes. Yeah. And Willie was a feature documentary. And yet, I started editing Willie in it was a September 2018, I guess. And then I finished in February. So October, November, December, January, like 5 months. That's crazy for a documentary, like a feature documentary.
Okay. How long would one normally take for you?
I mean, normally it would be like 8 months, like double that time. Or, 8 to 10 months. Some films are, they take over a year or years. So that's a very fast turnaround, But Laurence, it's literally how she functions. So, and it came together, the film came together, and we really wanted to submit it to Hot Docs. And so we were sort of like racing to meet that deadline. It was like a self-imposed deadline, but it was, to get into Hot Docs, and we got in. So it was worth it.
It certainly was. Honestly, how do you feel about things like that? I was speaking to a different filmmaker about it, and when you finished editing the film and you saw the final production, did you think in yourself, this is going to get in Hot Docs? They're mad not to take it. Do you have that kind of feeling within yourself?
Yeah.
Good. I thought I was going to get a modest, oh, who, me? No, not at all, or something like that. But good, you just came out of it straight away.
Yeah, I just loved it. I was like, this is so good. And we sent it to a couple of people who I trusted, really, really trusted, to give me an honest opinion and some notes. Because it was interesting for me. I normally work with, a lot of what I do has a network attached to it. Like right now I'm working on a series for FX about the LGBTQ rights movement in America. But so we have a network, and it's like they of course give notes. And and with Willie, it was like me and Laurence, like we had no notes. We had an executive producer, Bryant McBride, who was the NHL's very first Black executive. And he gave us good feedback in terms of like, oh, that's, you're using the wrong shot. Like that's, like technically he knew about hockey much.
Good.
I mean, being Canadian, I've watched it, but, there were times where I would, I put something in and he'd be like, oh no, that's wrong. Like the announcer is saying this and that's not the right, that's not the right play. So he was very invaluable in terms of having that insight.
Ah, that's good.
Yeah, we didn't really have anyone hovering over us, giving us like, story notes or anything like that. So we really had to just rely on ourselves. And then I said, well, we can't do that. Even though I felt pretty confident about it, I thought we should send this out to some people. And one of them was a documentary filmmaker who I knew. Um, and I sent him the film, and he did give us some really great little notes, and we took them, but he liked it. So I knew he would tell me if there was,
Yeah.
so that made me feel better. And so I thought, well, it's got to get into hot docs. I mean, it's hockey, first of all. It's a Canadian film festival, come on.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's not totally a sports documentary either.
No. It's a story of like triumph and intentional fortitude and much more rather than just hockey. And another thing I should have picked up on before when you said about she's a self shooter primarily, the director, grabbing the audio in the car. Do you know what type of process she went through to do that? Because the audio is really good in the car.
Oh, he's just wearing lav.
Okay.
Yeah, she just clips the microphone on him, and yeah.
And good to go. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, the audio is actually good in the car. I gotta hand it to her. She really, I was worried, when she said that she shoots by herself. I was like, oh my God, you don't have a sound person? Like
Yeah.
that's bananas. But it actually worked out fine. Like the sound is good, and so I was happy about that. It also, you can see that everyone she films, like his friends in New Brunswick, the
Yeah.
film to me is as much about friendship as it is anything else. Like when I was watching The Rushes for the first time, and I was like, here's this 83-year-old man, and his friends are all in their 70s and 80s. And look at them. They're like this group of besties that are just like any
Yeah.
old group of like, I was like, that is a life goal, like I want to be just as like, active with my friends when I'm in my 80s, as
That's a great
this
point.
group. Like it's just such a beautiful thing to see. And the fact that they, the campaign to get him recognized by the Hall of Fame was such a grassroots effort, like his friend Brenda. You can't have cast a better Brenda. She spearheaded the campaign. Like she was the organizer. She got all the
Yeah.
the letters together and the paperwork and the photos and into this big application. It's like a 61-page application. And you could not have cast a better Brenda. Like she's one of my absolute favorite people in the world.
She was brilliant.
Oh, she is brilliant. And I was so happy I got to meet her, because another wonderful thing about Laurence is that she was like, you have to come to the Hall of Fame induction ceremony. And I was like, what? And she was like, yes, you have to come. So I and I got to bring Christine, my wife, with me, and we went to Toronto for the induction ceremony, and it was a whirlwind weekend. I mean, we saw the Maple Leafs play from a VIP lodge, and we, it was like amazing. We got to meet all these hockey players and and meet all the characters in the film
That you've been seeing on screen for how long?
Yeah, and it was just wonderful. And sweet Brenda, this is so Brenda. When I met her, like a few minutes later, she came up to my wife and I, and she was like, I just wanted you to know that I ran for mayor in Fredericton, and in the 80s, and part of my platform was LGBTQ rights. And that was, long before it was trendy, and I didn't win, but I just wanted you to know that.
She's special. She's a good one, that's for sure.
She is. And so's Junior, his bestie.
Yes.
They're just adorable together. Like, it's just, I mean, they're so happy to see. I'm like, you've been friends for 70 years and you're still super excited to see each other this way. It's just.
In terms of your wife's involvement in film and television, Tell us about George in My Backpack and how the both of you are going to make this documentary.
Oh, it's actually not a documentary. It's narrative. Yeah, it's a short film. Yes. So it's based on my wife's true experience. It's a true story. And so so of course the pandemic's put a big damper on our shooting schedule because it would have been shot by now.
Yeah.
But she wrote an essay about George years ago, and he was her neighbor, and he died, and he was very ill and knew he was dying, and Christine pretty much became his only sort of friend. He was a very isolated man, and he had lost his husband years before, and so he lived alone, and he was a very stoic, isolated kind of person, and a little bit grumpy, but Christine befriended him, and Christine's just super warm and friendly, and as soon as people meet her, they like her. She's funny and charismatic. Yeah. So, and they were their front doors were, just a couple of feet away from each other in a typical New York tenement building. So, which we still live in the apartment, the same apartment that this story took place in. And so she befriended George, and he confided in her, and when he did die, he had expressed very many times that he wanted to be cremated, and when he died, there was no one to claim his body. His parents had long died, he had no siblings, no relatives, so there was no one to claim his body. So Christine paid for his cremation, and as a result, is entitled to his remains. So the film sort of tells that story, how she has to go and get George from the funeral home. And, and I don't want to say too much because we haven't, we haven't shot it yet. So, the script is written. The script is written, and we wrote it together, and that was really amazing because we've been together for 18 years, and it's the first time we wrote something together, and it went so well. We were so happy about that. The process was, we agreed on everything, and it was just it's based on her experience with George, and to tell it in a narrative way in a short film. Because we figured the first thing we do together shouldn't be a feature. Let's start small.
Yes.
Yeah, so it was just really great, and we got some really good feedback on that as well. We sent it away to Heather Matarazzo, who was in one of my favorite independent films of all time, Welcome to the Dollhouse. She's Dawn Wiener, the main character, and she actually works as a script consultant now. And so we got some great notes from her, and then we now have this film that we really love and we want to shoot, and we have to wait until it's safe.
So will you be producing the film as well? Will you be casting the actors? Have you got any idea who's going to be doing sound? I mean, is this a chance for you to not edit something but still be involved in it, or will you be editing it as well as co-writing?
Oh yes, of course I'll be editing it. Yeah, I definitely. We're gonna co-direct, and I think that Christine will be more. The directing duties will be divided in terms of she'll direct the actors a lot more, and I will direct. Actually, Laurence is going to shoot it. She's our DP, and because she is extraordinarily talented, and her composition, as you saw in Willie, it's so photographic, it's beautifully shot. Yeah. So she's actually our DP, and we do have a main actor playing the main character, Charlotte, who's a dear friend of ours. Her name is Janice Morgan, and she's extremely talented and is perfect. So we have a main character cast, and we need 2 more actors. We have some ideas. We're not, it's not set in stone now because as I said, we would have shot the film a few months ago, but we couldn't. So it was supposed to be shot in May, and unfortunately that didn't happen. So we do not have a sound person, but it's what I love about New York. One of the things that I love about New York is that New Yorkers really have this sense of community in the film business. So like I could call upon, and I edited a short film for a friend of mine, a few months back. We finished it, and so she will probably come on board as our producer. The person who did sound on her film will probably come and transfer to our team as well. So,
Excellent.
it's like, yeah, we have this like collective, so to speak, this informal collective of people that we like to work with and that make shorts, and, it's just so much fun. And so I really, really look forward to being able to do it finally.
But hey, so it's been so great speaking to you. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and telling us about some of the great work you've done. And I completely look forward to seeing more from you. I can't wait. I'm actually going to check out some more of your Vimeo page.
Oh, thank you, Damien. That's so sweet.
No, not a problem, not at all. And we'll speak soon.
Yes, we'll speak soon. It was a great fun talking to you.